Hey, Jen.
Hey, Monica.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are thrilled to be speaking with Rebecca Magee. Rebecca is the founder of Sister Seasons. It's an impact company that helps changemakers work with nature's cycles to develop skills that they need to be thriving regenerative leaders on this rapidly changing planet that we're on. Sister Seasons is all about revitalizing human health and planetary health at the same time.
Yes, and Rebecca brings over 15 years of experience in women's leadership and sustainability to her work at Sister Seasons. Previously, she held leadership roles at visionary organizations like EILEEN Fisher and Echoing Green.
You know, Rebecca, in this conversation, shares with us the intersection of gender equality and climate change, living seasonally, and nature's regenerative cycles. And I just think it's going to be great.
Yes, this is such a powerful conversation and one that Monica and I really needed. We hope you enjoy it. Rebecca, we are so happy to have you with us today. We've been talking about you for so long, so thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to jump right in and talk about Sister Seasons, how you started it and sort of where you are in the process, because it's an amazing, amazing concept. And I think it's so important for us as women and just a community to talk about these kind of things.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a long, windy road, as you could probably imagine, to getting to Sister Seasons launching in 2020.
Okay.
It's been almost 5 years, but it came out of two different streams in my life, two different paths that I did not ever think would intersect. One of those paths was my career in environmental sustainability and social impact. So really working on, in a lot of different ways, philanthropy, employee education around sustainability, working with a lot of women business owners who are doing really cool things. So, I mean, it just was really spanning the breadth of social impact and sustainability, but always had a common thread of how do we make this the default? How do we actually start to change people's behavior? And so that was happening over here. And then over here in maybe like 2015 or so, I started studying menstrual cycles, and it was first just for myself and being able to support my own well-being. I had kind of just like had this like awakening around the age of 30 that, oh my gosh, I have no idea how my body works. And why did no one ever tell me this?
Yeah.
Like I can have a college degree and an esteemed career and not know what's happening in my body. And so I started really getting into that and studying it. And because I was at a company, so I was working for EILEEN Fisher at the time, so super feminist, super progressive, incredibly just an innovative organization. We started looking at what was the intersection between gender equity and climate change. So we were rethinking that both from the strategy of the organization as a whole, how we approached environmental and human rights goals, but also for the purposes of my research was around how would that inform our philanthropic strategy. So we start interviewing all these experts and we hear over and over that women are disproportionately affected by and vulnerable to climate change, but they're also needed more than ever if we want to be designing effective solutions that are actually going to work for everybody.
Yep.
And that was really hard to hear. I hadn't heard that before. And so if people are hearing that for the first time, like know that like actually it's not something that's talked about enough. And so you're not alone if you've never heard that before. But my reaction to that as it really started to soak in was, well, actually, we're just screwed. We should just give up now. But no, it's over, because I was really burnt out. I was a burnt out New Yorker and, you know, had been really hustling to make a positive impact, you know, through my career. And I was just exhausted. I was watching all of my colleagues in across sectors, not just in my organization, but really just people who were so passionate about making a difference in the world. And then being distracted by just like the overwhelm of modern life, all the health issues that can come with that, and the mental health issues that can come with that. And I was like, well, like, okay, like if this is happening to me and all of my colleagues, then how are we actually what are we going to do? Like, how can we actually expect to ask women to step up and, take a seat at the table when they are so burnt out?
Right.
God, yes.
And that was like when the two streams met. And it was like, wait a second, I've been doing this climate work for how many years at this point? I had never realized that the same systems that have harmed our planet have also harmed women in really parallel ways. I thought they were like, okay, these two things are happening and they're both awful, but I didn't realize that there was a lot of similarities between those things. And that one of those things was that this cyclical nature that is particularly influential in women's well-being when we talk about the menstrual cycle. Governs our mood, brain chemistry, digestion. It's so much more than just a reproductive process, was also being, oppressed, taboo, pushed aside. And that's the same thing that's happening to our planet. There's this expectation that nature is operating at the same level of productivity and being on all the time, 24/7. And so because we haven't honored that in nature, we don't honor that in women, that's been a big part of why we're in the mess that we're in right now. And so that's what's set up for Sister Seasons to have that light bulb moment of like, oh, wait, can I do something about this? Yeah.
Well, that's exactly why we had to talk to you, because Katrina, our producer, and Monica, we were all talking, saying, oh my gosh, because I never thought of it that way. So when I was reading about your work, it was like that light bulb moment of, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I feel as a woman and as a place in society of that hustle culture and the burnout. I'm like, I should be doing more because I'm a woman. I want to make a difference. And then, of course, you're that burnout. And then that sense of exactly the same thing happening in nature, exactly the same thing. I was like, oh, Rebecca, you blew my mind. You totally blew my mind, because it made so much sense to me in that moment.
Yeah. And you hit on like two incredible points, is like we women are the caretakers, right? And so that leads to that burnout, and society is, I don't want to say demanding, but we've ended up in this sort of 2-income household. And I'm not at all for the tradwife trend at all. But I do think that economically that's become a challenge, right? So then you have a lot of, with your partner, like who's in charge of everything, kids, cooking, right? And then the second thing, which I think is super important, is sort of this taboo. I think that's a great word. Even the word menstruation, right? We're not comfortable saying it, right? And as somebody who is past quote unquote childbearing years, I didn't know much. Same thing. I didn't know much about my body or those processes until I started wanting to have kids, and I had to sort of think more intentionally about ovulation and fertility. And so there's this lack of focus. Like there's no research. Women just are sort of kicked to the curb, just like the planet, as well as it's a taboo to discuss it. And I don't know if that's like based on puritanical roots where everything has to be clean and God forbid we speak of these things. So I think it's super important. And then the third point I want to make, and maybe we'll circle back towards the conversation, is as women, and you've heard me say this, Jennifer, as a block, if we really voted for what we believed in and needed, we would run the country. And I think that's,
well, I know.
Excuse me. Yes. And I just think that we have so much power, and it has either been taken from us or we don't recognize our power because we're too worried about caretaking for others to choose a leadership role. So I'll just stop there because I would love to dive into cycles, like you brought up menstruation. But I think it's really interesting to think about seasonal cycles and our cycles and nature. So dig in a little bit for me, because I don't think we see that parallel a lot or have it discussed.
Yeah, totally. And thank you for weaving in some new things into this conversation. I feel like you set up the cycles part perfectly, because, the thing that really made sense for me when I was starting Sister Seasons, because I had been studying menstrual cycles, but because I also had this lens of climate science and systems thinking, I was like, well, if this is the aspect of us that is being so, both us as human beings, but also of our planet, that is being so suppressed What would happen if we embraced that and actually started really using it to guide us? And because nature's cycles, whether we're talking about the seasons or we're talking about cycles like the menstrual cycle or even like the whole life cycle of any living being, these are regenerative cycles. So if we're trying to bring about regeneration, whether that's personally to find more personal sustainability in our work and life, or we're trying to bring that about for communities or the planet or something, way bigger than us, we have to start like learning, like, how do we actually embody regeneration? What does that actually feel like? What does that actually take? And there's this blueprint in the natural world that is showing us how to regenerate. And so we can see that externally when we look to the seasons. So, whether that's like, the 4 traditional seasons that we think about. I know not everyone lives in a place where there are those 4 seasons, but we can think about that as a model that we can follow for what it would take to actually get to the end of a cycle and not collapse, but to be able to have the resources then to sustain that vitality, but to also expand it, right? We want to move towards flourishing. And so that's happening in the seasons. We can see it externally. And because we are nature, we're being influenced by that. But as women, we can also experience that within our bodies during our menstrual cycles, right? And so what was really cool when I started studying menstrual cycles and a practice called menstrual cycle awareness is they started drawing parallels between the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle and the 4 seasons. And I thought, that's really cool. I had never thought about that before. And it actually, from my understanding, derives from Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, this idea that there are universal patterns that are repeated at all levels of life within the universe. And so you can see your own body, regardless of what gender you are, as a microcosm of what's happening in the cosmos and what's happening outside of us. So we can see our own lived experience mirrored in nature, which is so cool. And so, so that was where those cycles started to come in, is like, well, okay, so if nature's given us this blueprint for regeneration and we have this cycle also within our body and in the natural world, how could we start to use the lessons from that to guide our work, life, creative cycles, all of that, so that we could start to actually know, like, what does it take to be a regenerative leader? What does it take to actually support our regeneration and extend that out beyond us?
I want to say something really quickly, because you saying that is exactly what I feel like. There's this pendulum of people that, like, we're fearing the seasons. I don't want it cold. I don't want it rain. So people are the biophobia, those seasons anymore. And I find it fascinating because what you're just saying is like, we're then, once we like say, I don't want it, I'm going to go up against it, I'm going to block it. We're blocking our own intuition of our own body's need, even if you don't have the 4 seasons, technically, if you have 2 seasons or a season, but it's still that awareness that there are seasons of the year, seasons of life that our bodies also go through. And the more we learn about the human nature aspect, the more we get to learn about our own bodies within that moment in time and that, that place and space. And it's so liberating.
Yeah.
And, this awareness of yourself. It's like you give yourself a gift once you start like reading what you're talking about. That's why I feel the way I do right now. You get to like know your body better. But I'm sorry, I just had to go off and say that. Yes, Rebecca. Yes, it's exactly like I feel it. I feel what you're saying to my core. So
Can I loop back to something that Monica said earlier? So Monica, you were talking about like the exhaustion that like especially women are always stuck in. And I think like that's where it's like when we look to nature, we're seeing that these natural cycles are regenerative cycles. But the world that we're living in right now pretends like we are in perpetual summer, right? we're not given, no human, no living being on this planet is given the permission to honor that winter, that rest phase, or even like the other phases, that are more inward focused, right? That are more nuanced. And so when we're always on all the time, we're kept in perpetual exhaustion. We act as if we are above and outside of nature's laws.
Mm-hmm.
And it serves to maintain the status quo. We will never move to a different system when we are still, even if we're trying to in my own social impact work, I was like, oh, I've got this beautiful mission and this vision and I want to accomplish it. But if I'm using the same tactics that created these crises, if I'm trying to move at that same pace, I'm going to get the same thing.
No, I like that a lot. And I have so many thoughts coming through my head that it's this constant cycle of creation. And we know that that's not how things work, right? It's just starting to bloom here in Atlanta. The daffodils are coming up and some of the cherry trees are starting to bloom. And that is the regeneration. They have been dormant for so many months and it's just coming back. And it's like capitalism and the stock market. I think the stock market's a fascinating thing because as a company goes public, it's all about comparative sales. What's the comp year to year or month to month or season to season? We always have to grow. And there's just not infinite resources. Really, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an economist, but we can't infinitely grow, right? The planet has limitations. We have limitations. A public company has limitations. If you're a retailer, if you're Eileen Fisher, I mean, how many stores can you open? And so there's a demand for more and growth, and it's super unrealistic to your point. And we're not given permission. I think that's really wonderful that you say that. But yeah, it's serving the status quo. And tell me a little bit about either other cultures or what you found of historically groups have honored rather than this flat line, right? Or really a line that goes up, because it just isn't possible to continue it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a really good question of past cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say as a white woman living in the US, I know a little bit about my ancestry, but I actually don't know how far back I would have to go to find my own ancestors who were practicing this very land-based way of being.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love immersing myself and learning from indigenous cultures, whether that's, Native American culture, but also, like I mentioned, Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. And so those are also ancient practices that people are still practicing today. But that's not my own tradition. And so that's really where looking to nature as my teacher has been really life-changing, because I might not know my own history. I wasn't taught this. I wasn't taught how to do this. But for all of us who are not indigenous to the places where we live, we're still in the natural world. The land wants us, the land loves us. And so we just have to go outside and start seeing where these patterns are happening and really awaken our senses to that, which is so critical for us when we are entering this uncharted territory of not knowing. The patterns that we've been taught or the stories of our culture are shifting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even when you were talking about the daffodils popping up, early spring is a really big issue in that things are coming out of dormancy too soon. And so when, as a result of climate change. And so as these patterns in the natural world are shifting, we have to start learning how to pay attention and really being in tune with the land. And so that's why I think it's been really helpful for me to both learn from other cultures, but also just cultivate a really personal relationship with nature so that it can be my own teacher.
Talk a little bit more about, because I think the wintering right? We hear a little bit of that, like wintering, and we get such burnout if it's quote unquote summer all the time, right? We're going to burn out because we just can't keep up that summertime, right? And so talk about how we get stuck in that. How do we break free from those patterns? How are you teaching that it's okay to rest?
Yeah, totally. I mean, winter is definitely my favorite season to teach because it's the one that our culture really wants to skip. And when we start to look
And
at
we
it,
do it. We do it with all the holidays, right? We're like,
yeah.
oh my God, it's Halloween. Wait, no, it's Thanksgiving. No, it's Christmas. Oh my God, it's New Year. Oh my God, go, 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 go. And then you're like, oh my God, it's January 2nd. Can I take a beat? And then the world kicks back in again. Sorry, I totally cut you off.
Well, can I say something about that too? Because I find it's really fascinating that we're talking about this, Rebecca and Monica, because I don't know if you're seeing this, the sense I'm feeling, because again, that push that we are not supposed to experience winter. On social media, there are certain social media sites that now say, guess what, guys, we only have 40 more days until the sun sets after 6 p.m. Finally, the sun's going to set after 6 p.m. Finally, the sun's going to set after 7. Like all these like, as if we're in this like struggle instead of like, why are everyone's pushing against it? So I think it's so interesting that there's this real fear and hatred for the seasons of life and the seasons at all. So it's very, very in tune with one another. We're pushing for something that isn't available right now. And it doesn't make sense. Like, why are we celebrating something that's in the future and not like the moment that we have?
Yeah.
I'm going off on another tangent too.
Okay, Rebecca, take all that and teach us.
Yeah. Well, okay. So when we talk about winter, what's really interesting is because we have these mirrors that we can see in other cycles, we could start to make sense of why our culture might avoid it. So in other cycles other cyclical phases that parallel winter would be the menstrual phase. So the bleed phase of the menstrual cycle, like society hates that. This is midnight. It's the depth of night. It's like the darkest time of night. It is death in the life cycle. So like when we think about the life cycle of any human being or other being, it mirrors the death phase. And even going back to what we were talking a moment ago around ancestors, our ancestors, like winter would have been really scary, right? You don't know who's going to make it to spring. And so there's so many reasons why I think that maybe has come up in our culture, that people are really scared of winter or avoid it. And like cold is uncomfortable. I'm a Southerner. I'm from New Orleans. You cannot convince me to go skiing. Like I'm not going to go play in the snow. But as I've learned these phases and really understood the critical role that every single one of those phases play in the ability of that cycle as a whole to be generative, to create life, I have made a good friend of winter. I have a totally different relationship with it. And so I think that's really where we can start. So like when we're talking about how do we break burnout cycles, how do we start to shift these patterns? One is like start to like notice what your relationship is with these cycles. Like which ones do you love? Which ones do you avoid? And how could you maybe start to look for what's the gift in each of these phases, regardless of what, find a cycle that resonates with you. Could be in your body, could be outside of you, and just start to like pay attention to that. And then the other thing that can be really helpful is as you're starting to notice what cycle phases you're in at any point. That could be, again, if you're tracking cycles within your body, like your menstrual cycle. It could also be even just like thinking about like different life chapters. If you were like, I am in a parenting stage and I am exhausted all the time, that's a cycle. It's not going to last for forever. So noticing what is my energy like in this cycle, in this specific phase. Also, seasons, very helpful to notice. So start tracking. What is my energy like? And then what feels good during this phase and what did not support me? And that can be a really helpful way to start noticing what your specific patterns are. So like as an example, we were just talking about winter. if when you get to a phase that is a winter-like phase, again, some of the ones that I mentioned, but also other times where maybe you just went through a significant loss in your life. Something's just ended, whether that's a project or a job, or, maybe you've had a loved one pass and you were caregiving for them. So when you enter these winter phases, notice, am I giving myself time to rest? Am I giving myself time to integrate what's just happened and really reflect on what I've just, the whole cycle passed? And if we're making just a little bit of time for that, it can be really helpful to start to just embody that, just like even just 1% in our life, and notice what's your energy during that time? What are you drawn to? What feels supportive? And how do you start to, these are things that we can plan for. When we talk about particularly menstrual cycles, there's this idea that it's absolutely unpredictable and women are so wild and crazy and you just never know what kind of hysteria they're going to bring in. And it's like, actually, this is a cycle, and we can anticipate what these phases will be and how our energy and our mood will shift, and we can plan into that. And that is true for all of the other cycles that we're moving through. And so we can start to stop being caught off guard by this and be like, oh yeah, every time it gets to spring, this is one of my patterns. I get a huge surge of energy and then I say yes to everything. And then later in the year, I'm so overwhelmed and burnt out that I'm just a puddle, And so it's like, okay, now I know that pattern. Yeah. And so when I start to hear myself saying yes, sometimes I have to go back and actually say, I'm sorry, I actually can't do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wrote down noticing awareness patterns. I think that is the first step really in understanding that. And I was thinking that, Jen and I both had family losses this past late summer, and, it was a lot. And to us, but also Katrina's credit, our producer, it was we just need to take a break. And so we took a month off, Jen, and just didn't do we just had to stop. And it felt weird, bad, I don't know, to do that, because you felt, I don't know, obligated, or you don't do that. You keep moving forward, you keep creating. And honestly, it was really lovely that we were able to do that. And we also take a break on the podcast sort of in that late December through early January phase. And we've even extended it a little bit this year. And again, it's there's a little bit of fear. Oh, I'm not producing, I'm not creating, we got to keep this going. But it's been very regenerative to be able to do that. The last thing I'll say, and this is just me having awareness, thinking about this, and this is a little more what's happening, politically in the climate, is that you hear a lot of we have this new administration and a lot of people are unhappy about it. People were very excited about the old one. Obviously, a lot of people are very excited about the new one. And then if you were unhappy with it, there was a big question of where are the marches? Where's the resistance? Where are people showing their discomfort and unhappiness with things? And I'm looking at it now from a seasonal cycle, that people had worked really, really hard to try to get somebody elected. And when it didn't happen, it's obviously very disappointing. And I think people had to, I don't know if retreat's the right word, but they had to winter. And so now you're seeing people who are unhappy with the current climate, no pun intended, climate and political climate, are waking back up. There is an awakening that's happening. This isn't a politics podcast, but I do think it's important to think about how society and culture and community moves together. And I think it's interesting to note that trend that falls right into exactly what you work on. And I don't know if you agree with that or have thoughts on it, but even just right now, having this conversation, it's helped me process. I mean, it's kind of funny because I'm sometimes it's understanding why things are happening. For me personally, I can appreciate it or I can understand it better. Even if I'm not happy with it, at least I can, if we understand why, it gives us a little bit of control, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if there's a question in there, but
to that too, though, Monica, because I love in your website, Rebecca, as that thing it says, because I think this is also it's a call to action of an awareness, like you're just saying, the line is, it's time for self-care and planet care to grow up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love that.
Because it's like, yeah, put your stake in the ground. Like we have to do better for ourselves, for our own well-being and health of, once we're healthy, then our families are healthy, then the communities are healthy. We have to be, more graceful with ourselves. It's like you just said, Monica, like this discovery of why you feel the way you do be like, oh, now I'm learning about myself and how then I move through life in a more empathetic way and kinder to ourselves and those around us.
Well, and you, sort of back to the leadership work that you do, Rebecca, you work really hard on something, right? And whether that was a candidate you wanted to get elected or a project, or maybe you just had a baby, right? You worked really hard for 9 months, right? Or you caretook for somebody. And once that project or that comes to fruition, whether that was however it ended up successful or not successful, we're not given grace and we're not given the time to retreat. Talk about your leadership work. How do we get better leaders? We need more female leaders or women leaders, however you identify, but we need more femininity in the leadership, I believe. Talk about leadership and how do we cultivate that and make it okay to retreat or to winter. And
I love that like you are modeling that for all of us in the break that you took, that like one, so I think like when we think about what's celebrated in leaders in the dominant culture today, right? This is like what we've all grown up finding out, like hearing about. You want to be consistent. You want to know absolutely everything. You want to be able to like be in total control. You want to be unshakable.
Yeah.
And what you're sharing, which I think is really related to this kind of regenerative leadership that I teach, is like, what about responsive leadership? What about when something happens that's really unexpected and we say, what's going on both in myself and in this team or this group? And what do we need? And it's like, okay, but we have to build that awareness, right? That's not a skill that everyone, like that modern life really supports, right? So interoception being that skill of being able to sense what's happening within my body is like, because a lot of people, especially when we talk about the political climate right now, people are angry, but they might not actually know where that anger is coming from. They might not actually realize that actually there's a lot of grief under it. That actually there's like a few layers down. So, it's like building up that skill of interoception. How do I, as a leader, know what's happening within my body so that I can practice self-leadership? And then how am I also becoming an incredible listener and observer of what's happening within my team and my group so that I can be responsive to their needs? And then how am I also then facilitating the conversation of, okay, this is what I'm sensing. What else is going on for everyone else? And then how are we going to respond to this? And someone else would say, looking through that traditional leadership lens, well, you have to stick to the plan. You said you were going to do this.
Of course.
Right. God.
Yeah.
You better be strong.
Yeah.
Don't
push
show
through.
weakness. Yeah. And honestly, I just like want to like punch her in the face, that whole lean in stuff. I always could never stand that. I was like, really? Okay. Privilege to lean in.
Yeah. Well,
sorry.
And some of this, I think that's like, a good example. I also don't want to we're all just learning at our own pace. Everyone is like figuring this out as we go. But I think that's where I actually don't use a lot of language around like feminine leadership or female leadership. I think we actually need regenerative leaders.
I love that. I love that.
And feminist leaders. So people who are collaborative, responsive, amazing listeners. They are flexible and adaptable, because these are the things that we need, not just like for our societies to flourish, but also if we want to be able to adequately address climate change, right? Yeah. Because this is not a predictable, we don't know what's going to happen. And we need to have leaders who can adapt. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, oh boy.
But you're already doing it. You're already practicing it in your own life. And then as I think that's where, I know that this can feel overwhelming for people, especially when it's new, but it's like, okay, where am I already doing this? Actually, you did this when you took a break from the podcast, and you already did this when you planned, the podcast seasons, and you said, we're probably going to need a little bit of time off to just digest, rebuild ourselves for another season. And so when we start to do that for ourselves and in the spaces that we're in, that's where we really start to cultivate the ability for to extend that out further. But we cannot do it for something outside of ourselves until we can do it for ourselves first.
Right. Well, you're giving us permission. And I don't want to, that maybe feels like a submissive, because it's like we shouldn't have to have that, but sometimes we need examples. It's scary to do something different. And so I don't know if permission's the right word, but I didn't even recognize until we're having this conversation that we were giving ourselves space and time. And, we just sort of did it, and I'm glad we did, but that it is interesting. It just fits right in with this. It's sort of like very magical. So I appreciate the conversation because it's creating noticing and awareness, which is like what Jen does in her practice is, incredible when she takes you out in nature. It's the noticing. I don't know, Jen, you want to just touch on that for a minute? It's so important, and we just don't let ourselves feel.
Yeah, we're so programmed to just kind of shut off the world. But I do think the noticing, but also, you're giving someone permission to be like, I always knew that. We know it internally, we know it instinctually, but for so long, the world's been kind of shoving us to, nope, numb yourself to what you already innately know. So I think, Rebecca, you are giving us permission to be like, yeah, that makes sense to me because that's how I feel. But the world has always said, no, buy your way to this, or buy your way to comfort or to numbness. But it's that real astute awareness in your body, like you just said, like really knowing your body in that space. You know how to move in it. You know how to feel in it. You know how you can show up for yourself in it and know what's right for you, or to be in a space like, nope, this isn't the right group for me. This is not the right setting. I need to. So you're helping us learn about ourselves a little bit more.
So tell us sort of like, what advice would you give people who are feeling anxious right now and what the future holds? I saw something, I didn't even know that this existed, but it was like an uncertainty index, like a US uncertainty index that I saw, posted somewhere. And it said the uncertainty in the United States is just slightly higher than during COVID right now. Like that blew my mind because I'm feeling that personally. I'm feeling kind of at that early COVID stage of like confusion, the unknown, what's going to happen. Is everything going to be okay? Is everything going to go to hell? And then it was reflected in this quote unquote uncertainty index. Maybe I'll find that graph and put it in the show notes. But what do you help us? What do you share?
Okay. I'm going to share two things. First, I want to speak to the mind part of it, the all of us who are just listening with our intellects to this podcast. And then I want to speak to like our bodies. And so from an intellectual standpoint, I can tell you that we already know that all the solutions that we need to address climate change, the technology, the like what it would actually take to put these solutions into place, all of that already exists. And the other thing that I'm finding in my own work as I've been working with leaders and through my own programs, so particularly women and non-binary leaders, is that all the leadership practices that we are needing to be able to step up and be regenerative leaders already exist in us, right? It's already there. It's just we don't often feel permission to be able to express it, or that there is support, right? Is it okay to be a leader that looks different than, that horrible manager I had back in my first job, So I think one is all the solutions are here already. And we are already the leaders that we need at this time on our planet. We just have to figure out how to actually get that out into the world. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing, and just speaking to our very human experience of this, is I think appropriate to what we're talking about today is letting nature help us here, right? And so letting nature be our teacher. And so I think when we, especially for people like me who work in the climate space, it can feel all the time I have to save the planet, and I have to the planet's hurting, I can't take anything else from it. But in truth, the earth is ever giving. Even, I think it's a Robin Wall Kimmerer quote about like, even a wounded earth supports us. Even a wounded earth can nourish us. And so it's like, go outside and spend time, just like tell Mother Earth, like, what are you feeling? And like, let the natural world support you. I mean, we know all the statistics. I'm sure, Jennifer, you could talk about this too, about like the health benefits of being outside and in nature. So there's that. But I think it's also like giving ourselves time to reconnect and re-fall in love with everything that we're trying to save is what can really sustain us, right? So there's very physical things that are happening in our biochemistry when we're in nature, but there is also this like wonderful heart remembering that can happen, that like, this is why I'm doing this, but I have to have a relationship with it too.
I think that is like the most beautiful way to end this conversation, because I think we could talk to you for a few more hours. I feel like there's so much to still talk about, but I think that was a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. What do you think, Monica?
I love it. I want to know, where can our listeners learn more about Sister Seasons, support your work, follow you? When's the book coming?
Yeah, if people want to learn more about Sister Seasons, you can go to sisterseasons.com. I do send a monthly newsletter also that teaches a lot of this. And so if you want to just start learning with me, you can do that. There's also a free course on the website called Field Notes, which is a daily mindfulness practice of starting to do this cycle tracking that I've been talking about today. So that can be a really fun way for people to start learning.
Great.
That's great.
Well, this was amazing, Rebecca, and thank you so much. And we hope to meet you in person at some point. This was so beautiful. And thank you for the work you're doing and what you're sharing and helping us notice.
Yeah, I'll see you at the Biophilic Leadership Summit.
That's right. We should shout that out. Come meet Rebecca in person, and Jen and I will be there as well on March 30th through April 1st here at Serenity. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And yeah, we'll hang out and take a walk in nature together in a month.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Another amazing conversation. I don't know about you, but I feel like we really, really need to hear that message right now.
Yeah, it felt very validating, and it gets back to the theme that we return to a lot, which is tapping into intuitive knowledge, which I feel like we've really lost.
I know, right? Living seasonally, tuning into our own bodies and to nature cycles, we innately know how to do this. But like we mentioned when we were talking to Rebecca, it's kind of been beaten out of us in a world that's go, go, go all the time.
Yeah, and I love the whole concept of wintering and retreat. I mean, obviously, you kind of got how I got really into that, and allowing ourselves to slow down, especially when we really need this after a major change or a loss.
Absolutely. And I thought it was really interesting when Rebecca was talking about all the different versions of wintering and how, as a culture, we're wary of all of them. The bleed phase of the menstrual cycle, midnight, the death cycle, we have such negative connotations, but all these things are part of our natural regenerative cycle.
Exactly. And we need these positive cycles, regenerative cycles, to sort of break out of the burnout cycle.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine a world where our leaders thought this way? Just a question.
Well, it's pretty hard to do at the moment, but I love thinking in those terms. And I think Rebecca used a great term, regenerative leadership, and thinking about that as a framework as we go forward and something that we can model in our own lives.
So we highly encourage you to check out Sister Seasons and sign up for their free online course, Field Notes, in order to get started.
And as always, feel free to reach out to us at hello@biophilicSolutions.com with any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. Till next time, Monica. Bye.
Talk later, Jen.